I praised A Plague Tale: Innocence for seamlessly transporting me to a setting as unexplored and unfamiliar as the role I was to take up. Female medieval non-combatants are underrepresented on all three counts in video games, and while Amicia does become a combatant, she does so parallel to a hasty adoption of the responsibilities of motherhood. Responsibilities that are, as far as I can tell, otherwise completely unexplored in the participatory ways this medium allows. The amazing thing to me was the lack of friction I felt in assuming these roles. The narrative so expertly guided me through Amicia's transformations that I never felt betrayed by the absence of any real choice. Her initial decision to kill, for instance, felt like a completely natural outgrowth of where we were on the narrative journey. I pulled the trigger not just because I wanted to, or even because I had to progress the story, but in order to protect Hugo from those bastards who killed our parents. To justify its existence as a linear, cinematic experience generally, and as a sequel to Innocence specifically, A Plague Tale: Requiem must achieve similar levels of ludonarrative consonance. Its narrative must be both powerful and purposeful. It must be aligned, or preferably integrated with other elements, so that anyone who might step into Amicia's shoes is completely transported and utterly absorbed. I wrote all that before finishing the game, and now it somehow rings even more true. I have now been left slack-jawed by one of the most powerful endings I've experienced, and I'm here to tell you that Requiem meets or surpasses all of the above expectations. If possible, it tells an even more compelling story than Innocence, in an even more cinematically beautiful way. Putting the two games head-to-head like that does feel a bit wrong, though, when they combine into such a perfectly bookended duology. I do not know if I will be able to do any sort of justice to the power of this story, but for us, there is only the trying. The fact of Sequeldom gives rise to two questions, the first having to do with innovation. Has the formula changed, and has it done so for the better? In this case, the gameplay has evolved in many ways. Most fundamentally, sling stones are now in unlimited supply, so the survival economy takes shape around other elements, such as the crossbow that I very much appreciate, and the Last of Us consumable knife system that I very much don't. I would have preferred Amicia to just start carrying around a real knife that doesn't break, like a normal medieval person, especially in light of the themes of lethality in this narrative. Like, you aren't a kid anymore, you killed something like 70 people just in the first game, so you could maybe start doing it in a less inconvenient way than with the sling your dear departed father taught you to use. Of course, a durable knife would require changes to the encounter design, but that might just end up making the game more fun. Anyway, the crossbow is also heavily limited in use, but I am okay with that in light of its power. It can kill armored enemies instantly from a distance. With the upgrades that I acquired as quickly as possible, Amicia can carry up to 6 bolts that are recoverable from bodies. In this way, the crossbow can become a very central component of your playstyle as long as you're willing to go lethal. The crossbow is also one of many new tools and abilities used to solve differently designed rat puzzles and environmental puzzles, and the enemies are a part of the puzzles too from a certain perspective. In fact, there are quite a few more sequences that mix enemies, rats, and environmental considerations into one big puzzle that often seems to have only one non-lethal solution. If you go lethal, then it becomes more of a sandbox than a puzzle. The storytelling, on the other hand, has not evolved very much at all. That is not a problem, of course. The first game already had a very compelling narrative, interwoven with the gameplay relatively seamlessly. Requiem tells a very different story, but does so largely in the same way. A lot of narrative is delivered while walking around or puzzling, and cutscenes are usually saved for truly critical moments. More common are the seamless, mo-capped set pieces where the player still gets to choose where to view the scene from.
Hugo, I know you're upset, and I know you wanted to help, but killing people, even bad people...
They're just like the Inquisition. Like Rodan. They do whatever they want to other people.
And sometimes they force us to act, yes. But just let me take that decision, please.
All this, it's not fair.
I know. It will stop once we find out how to heal you. Come here. I think we owe Sophia an apology.
In an older style of game, these might all have been cutscenes completely severing the connection of agency. Cutscenes are necessary in a story as ambitious as this one, but like in Innocence, I think they have been used with admirable restraint. The second question asked of a sequel is whether it is a better experience for those who have enjoyed its predecessor. For Requiem, I would answer with an unequivocal yes. In fact, I would say that this game should not be played without playing Innocence first, and that is largely for narrative reasons. The gameplay has been improved, but when the story is so much of the focus, that kind of doesn't matter. Horizon Forbidden West is another sequel with even greater gameplay and quality of life improvements over its predecessor. While it would be an inferior narrative experience without memories from Horizon Zero Dawn floating around in your head, that franchise is nowhere near as focused on its story as A Plague Tale is. The combat and traversal systems are much more complex and involved, and they encompass a much larger portion of the experience. While you would suffer less investment in the story, Forbidden West's improvements to gameplay are significant enough that you could make an argument for skipping Zero Dawn. I am not recommending that because it is quite a compelling story, but you could make an argument. That idea does not hold any water here, though, because the combat has not been improved that much, and that's not why you're playing A Plague Tale anyway. You are playing it because you have become spellbound by the storytelling, and as such, you need to play Innocence first. Requiem's story does do a good job of gangplanking for those who haven't, but later on, and especially at the ending, that prior experience becomes more and more important. The ending in particular is probably less than half as powerful, without the memories from Innocence to back it up. Immersion has to start somewhere, and it is not immediate. It can take a while to become invested in the narrative and the gameplay loop, to be given a reason to care. Innocence sold me in the first 30 minutes. Amicia's first kill marked the end of her transformation when she accepted the role of guardian for this little brother she barely knew. She also accepted, with fewer and fewer qualms from that point on, the lethality necessary to protect Hugo. And I was right there with her. It was this transformation that pulled me in, irregardless of who I was. Amicia was a different person before this, and so was I. But that didn't matter anymore. The transformation, culminating in the decision to kill to protect Hugo, had united us in motivation and purpose. Onboarding players into a sequel is always going to be more challenging. People who haven't played the first game just need a decent tutorial and a reason to care, but those who are continuing their journey inevitably come in with all sorts of expectations. In Requiem, it took me almost 4 hours to finally come to terms with the new gameplay systems and the new depictions of the characters. The characters were the lesser of those two hurdles, but it didn't help that they were all suddenly English. Hugo and Amicia are voiced by the same actors, but in the last game everyone was putting on a French accent. In fact, that served as a way of distinguishing them from the real English soldiers in that story. Here in the south of France, though, everybody's accent is uniformly British. Lucas has changed the most in the intervening year. He grew out his hair, and his voice has definitely cracked.
Well, I'll get back to studying now.
Lucas?
Well, if I want to become an alchemist,
But you are an alchemist.
I'm still your mother's apprentice.
All right, go and study. We'll stay a little longer.
Right. Goodbye.
With the playable siblings, I actually found the lack of change more jarring. They are introduced playing as children, which is how we saw them last, but I couldn't help but dwell on all the bodies that lay in the ground so that we could be here. Fortunately, I wouldn't have to wait long for that undercurrent to re-emerge, and it would remain a constant and growing theme. I experienced a great deal more friction at first with the new gameplay and combat systems. I became frustrated with the unforgiving puzzliness of some of the bigger sequences that mix enemies and rats. I was trying to find the one non-lethal solution, because I wanted the stealth upgrades you get for doing that, and because Lucas kept telling me not to kill anyone. And, because these guys are just soldiers and haven't done anything wrong. They're just caught up in the gears of history like the rest of us. As we continue, though, the brutality of the orders these soldiers are carrying out becomes clear. Their attitude towards us isn't helping their case either.
3 more down here. They didn't let go easily.
Oh no, a soldier.
Hey! What are you doing here?
We're just crossing.
No one gets out. Those are the orders.
Wait, no!
You should be dead!
He's going to throw. Amicia!
Oh, Lord. That was so close.
You just killed a soldier of the army of Provence.
I know. Why did he attack us?
Look, they're killing townsfolk.
They're purging the districts now.
We are just trying to find some nightshade to help Hugo, and they are trying to kill us. They are killing everybody here. The senselessness of their cruelty really starts to piss you off, which is good for immersion because Amicia is getting pissed off too. Trying not to kill to get those upgrades actually contributed to immersion here. I was fed up with these guys and the madness of them trying to fight us in such a blatantly apocalyptic scenario. I was sick of Lucas and the game itself telling me not to kill, to just sneak around and be a bystander to such crimes. And so, when Amicia finally snapped, I was ready to follow suit.
There you go! Oh, see? There's nothing to be scared of!
We have to go!
No! I'm tired of being afraid! I'll show them that it's over! Come, I'll give you what you want!
This sequence and Lucas's subsequent pep talk finally brought me all the way on board.
Yes, because this world hurts. And it keeps hurting. And you want to hurt it back. But it's a fight you cannot win, Amicia. You are not them. You are a Darun.
Again, it took a transition of character for me to become fully immersed. I've become fascinated by this idea, and it may be something to look for in other narrative experiences. Perhaps the player only becomes invested after they have followed the hero across the threshold. After this point, not only had the new iteration of these characters and gameplay systems won me over, but I now accepted them as a continuation of what I experienced in Innocence. Those threads became connected. I now understood the thematic space we occupied as an extension or a consequence of the events of the first game. Innocence was, oddly enough, very much about innocence, its loss and its arguable restoration. Amicia sacrificed her innocence to protect Hugo, but in doing so dragged him down with her. In the end, the defeat of the outer evil allowed us to try to leave the inner evil behind, to try to pretend that we hadn't had to kill dozens just to be able to live the innocent life that children deserve. Innocence had its share of moralizations.
I did it for him! And I'll kill you again if I have to! I'll kill all of you!
But it was very clear who the bad guys were. The Inquisition attacked us, killing our father and destroying any chance we had at a normal life. Their fate could be justified as reaping what they sowed. Arguably, Vitalis and his lust for power were far more to blame for many of the deaths in that game than we were. Requiem, according to the dictionary, had its first known use in the 14th century, the century this story occupies. It means something like quiet rest in Latin and refers to a mass for the souls of the dead, that they may find peace. Requiem turned out to be just as fitting a title as Innocence, due to the soundtrack if nothing else. We have the Estonian Philharmonic Chamber Choir to thank for flawlessly setting a requiescent tone. This is a game about mourning and loss, about dwelling on outcomes and consequences, and, perhaps most of all, about futilely striving for peace. The previous disaster in our homeland of Guyenne hangs over this entire story, and as hard as we may try not to add to that pile of corpses, there are plenty more on the way. The thematic space I found myself immersed in for many twists and turns was one of creeping guilt and uncertainty. Consequences and moralizations become inescapable. We are just trying to live. Amicia is just trying to protect Hugo. The question that Requiem is constantly asking, though, is at what cost? Every companion, except Arnaud, tells Amicia to rein in her rampage.
You have a whole garrison here, why don't you really let yourself go?
Stop!
No!
Control your flame, Protector. Others are burned in it. And you are not a goddamn army. He looks up to you. And when your death wish becomes his, this is what happens. And this will have consequences.
Even Hugo disagrees. There is a constant conflict, especially later on, between Amicia's need to protect him and his desire for both of them to be free of all of this. For her, Hugo's life is the most important thing in the world, which is because, as she sometimes admits,
I need you.
Hugo, however, doesn't want to be that important. He wants to be normal.
I don't want a legacy. I want to be normal.
And he certainly doesn't want to be the cause of any more death. If you haven't figured it out by now, we are going to stroll up and down through this entire experience, right up to the bitter end. It is known that nobody reads descriptions, so here's your warning. If there is the slightest chance that you might want to play Requiem in the future, do not watch beyond this point.
But you don't do it on purpose.
We encounter many factions that seem, from our perspective, to act stupidly or senselessly, but perhaps we ought not to throw or sling stones. We have killed dozens to protect someone who is arguably responsible for the deaths of thousands, so maybe we are the crazy ones. If Amicia was ever in the wrong, though, I was right there with her. I don't necessarily agree with or condone her actions. They are not right or justified in that sense, but yet there was no specific point at which I disagreed. She's just doing what anyone would do if they found themselves driven into the same corner. The tragedy is that you could also say that for everyone else in this story. They all have understandable motivations to varying degrees. Each faction encountered feels different, and different levels of lethality seem appropriate for them. The slavers are immediately exhibited as very evil, and Amicia responds in kind. Or at least my Amicia did. The soldiers of Provence, first in the Red City and then on the island, are initially friendly, but the gradual revelation of their senseless brutality is paired with a gradual increase in encouraged lethality. This is one way in which the themes of gameplay correspond with those of narrative. We are caught in this sort of downward spiral where everywhere we visit becomes destroyed, and everyone we meet ends up dead. We may ascend the streets of Lacuna, bathed in the light of the so-called brighter days, but we later descend through the rubble of the same town, surrounded by death, darkness, and rats. It is difficult to disentangle ourselves from that spiral of death. There is an unasked question hanging over all of this. Have we absorbed evil from the carnage surrounding us, or is the carnage surrounding us the result of our evil? And this is not the banal question often asked of kill happy and flat-charactered video game protagonists. It is a real question this time, rooted in the story of Hugo's condition.
So, Hugo, you ever offered a flower to a lady your age?
No, I prefer feathers now.
Ah, moving on to something more exciting. Flowers, feathers.
Feathers are better,
Why?
because they make you fly.
I get it.
Well, don't fly away right now, please.
It seems there is no good replacement for the word cinematic, but I have grown tired of that adjective being applied to video games. It brings with it a set of unwanted expectations from a completely different medium. Some games try to be movies, oversaturating themselves with cutscenes, but it is not in their nature. Video games lack the direct, purposeful storytelling and controlled pacing of film, while film lacks the participatory immersion that makes games games. It is an entirely different set of challenges. How do you make every frame a painting when the player has camera control? Environments and encounters must be constructed in a way that naturally paces the gameplay out to match the pace of the story, and the player needs to be nudged towards looking at things that are important to the narrative. It also helps when every camera angle from every position in the level reveals nothing that isn't just absolutely fucking beautiful. This is the first graphically intensive game that I played on my brand new RTX 3060, and I am glad I made that change. Even on low settings, I still experienced a little framiness here and there. Other than that, and a pretty transparent level of detail radius in highly vegetated areas though, everything was looking top-notch. I was most impressed in my transition to ray tracing hardware by the use of dramatic lighting. Light Fire and their interplay with darkness are very strong themes in this game, and the way that firelight or sunlight is cast on character models' faces, and specifically Amicia's crossbow, is just amazing. Like everything else on display here, this breathtaking lighting is a part of the story being told. Whether cast on one side of a character's face in a cutscene or seeping through the cracks from the torch held by a menacing enemy, light is used to achieve narrative, dramatic, or cinematic goals, while also being an integral gameplay mechanic. It keeps the rats away. Lighting, though, is just one of many elements that contribute to the power of the narrative. This scene, if that's even the right word for it, is the lead up to our initial encounter with the immediately very evil slavers. The sound effects here are basically just ambient. The waves crashing on rock tell of the impending storm Sophia recently warned us about, but they also portend the upcoming clash of wills that will create a very different kind of storm. We don't know what the growing cacophony of gull cries means until it reaches its peak. The gulls are feasting on the corpse that is our first real hint of the trouble ahead. The only other sound comes from us, the incessant heartbeat of footsteps that, like the mo-capped walk cycle, accompanies our entire journey. Music is actually largely silent here to give space for the sea to speak, and, I suppose, because we are at a point of transition. The music, like us, is waiting to see what we're about to walk into before it decides how to feel about it. There is a distinct drum beat when our objective comes into view. Perhaps calling us to our duty, but then it goes quiet again until we discover the body. That's when the cello starts up again with its minor key ruminations that always accompany death and violence in this game and its predecessor. The discordant strings continue as we are exposed to more signs of the slaver's evil. The drums do not join in again until Amicia first strikes back at that evil to carry out her reluctant duty. Perhaps the mournful strings of death were for the slavers, not for us. Dialogue, of course, is also playing its part. First Hugo and then Sophia react to the view of the fort we're heading towards. Hugo expresses some misgivings with the word scary, but all that Amicia can see is the goal she is so single-mindedly focused on.
Oh, look!
There's our fort.
It's big. It's scary.
That building on the left. It looks like our chapel, no?
I think. Yes.
Perfect. Let's keep following the coastline.
Sophia's answer, I think, yes, is good enough, or rather, perfect for Amicia. She is blind to uncertainty, only caring about getting to the thing that might save Hugo. She is the one who points with certainty at the destination, saying that we need to keep following the shoreline. Hugo himself isn't as enthusiastic, so he is the first to point out the blood that hints at trouble on the path to our objective. Amicia, however, remains committed.
Amicia, there's blood.
Oh no.
A body.
What?
He's chained up.
We have to go back.
No, we need to get to that chapel.
Amicia, we've got a dead man here.
We'll be careful.
We need to be.
Let's go.
She gives the unsatisfactory answer of, "We'll be careful," in a tone that means nothing of the kind. It is the same commanding tone as, "We need to get to that chapel." Despite Amicia's single-mindedness, it is here that our path diverges a bit from the shoreline she wanted to follow. We are not following the shoreline or getting to the chapel. We are getting bogged down in some sort of evil mess, but Amicia cares much more about the ends than the means. The environment, and the way we are able to move through it, is also an integral component of the story. Coming around the end of this promontory, our objective is the first to be revealed, starkly silhouetted against the soon-to-be-setting sun. This reflects Amicia's utter certainty in that goal. The body, on the other hand, is not fully visible until we almost trip over it. It is hidden behind a rock, only hinted at by the pool of blood, the chains, and the cluster of seagulls. Not only does this show how drama can be created by an environment, even when the player has total control of camera and character, but it illustrates Amicia's reluctance to recognize the cost of reaching the goal she has utter faith in. Because of the way the environment is built, we are encouraged to see the situation the same way Amicia does. The distant objective is much more visible, and hence more important, than these minor stumbling blocks known as consequences. Those consequences, though, are not going away. They contribute to a persistent, creeping, unsettling doubt. Now I will shut up and roll the whole scene for you, with a little extra to show Amicia's response to the evil we have encountered.
Oh, look!
There's our fort.
It's big. It's scary.
That building on the left. It looks like our chapel, no?
I think. Yes.
Perfect. Let's keep following the coastline.
Amicia, there's blood.
Oh no.
A body.
What?
He's chained up.
We have to go back.
No, we need to get to that chapel.
Amicia, we've got a dead man here.
We'll be careful.
We need to be.
Let's go. Up we go.
All right.
You're done running, my friend!
What?
Enjoy your freedom!
Another one.
Shh, quiet.
What the hell?
He's right above us.
Damn bastard made me switch. We really need to teach them.
Who is it?
Don't know. Stay low. There's more.
I got that one. The others ran away.
Shit.
Keep watch in case they come back to try and free the rest. I'll take this one back.
Understood.
The others.
Let me go, pig!
Oh, I will. Soon. I want quiet. Kill any trespassers.
Damn it. Who are they?
I'd say slavers by the looks of it.
Slavers?
They capture people and sell them like animals.
Really?
But that won't stop us.
Are you hurt? I think...
You made a mistake! Come in here! How dare you!
Bastard.
Imagine 16 hours of that, and you may get some idea of how much work has gone into synthesizing all of these elements into an expansive story that you get to be immersed in. The game only encourages you to look in a narratively relevant direction. It is still your choice to do so, to focus on what you deem important to the exclusion of everything outside the field of view. That choice buys you a stake in a tale that is jam-packed full of this sort of narrative complexity. For instance, we toy with the idea of separation for the duration of Chapter 5, but at the end it becomes permanent. The river itself is a symbol of division. First, Lucas and I are separated from everyone on the boat. Amicia states her intention to get back to Hugo quickly because our mother's presence is not enough to placate his condition. We have not held his hand since Chapter 1, so the player misses him too. She repeatedly asks Lucas to pick a side, between her desire to follow Hugo's vision and her mother's faith in this order that supposedly knows best.
What about your mother?
I don't care. But you will have to pick a side.
She's my magistrar.
In our effort to reunite with the others, though, Lucas and I eventually become separated ourselves. It is only at the end of the level that Hugo shows everyone where he would like to stand, and it finally becomes clear where the real borders lie between the four of us. This turning point is marked by the acquisition of a crossbow from the now dead Joseph and a head wound from the for now unfriendly Arnaud. Both of these souvenirs will stay with Amicia for the rest of her journey, tangible reminders of these tumultuous events and their consequences, just like the outfit change in Innocence right before that initial decision to kill. It is not a crossbow that makes very much sense. It was a windlass crossbow on a mount on Joseph's boat, suggesting a very high draw weight. The use of steel material for the bow is consistent with that. When it is on the mount, there is a half-hearted attempt to use the windlass realistically, but of course the real loading process would take far too long for engaging gameplay. Once it is loose of the mount, it has some vestigial pulleys left at the back, but Amicia just sort of casually pulls it back in a way no human would be able to do. That's what the windlass was for. I would have preferred a crossbow with a goat's foot lever, because that would be more realistically fast to load, and you could make the animation look strenuous to convey a greater feeling of power, consistent with the ability to penetrate armor. But hey, we take what we can get, such as the most realistic portrayal of trimming a square-rigged sail that I have yet seen in a video game. Sea of Thieves does a good job, especially when you consider that it is an actual gameplay system. This, however, is a scripted sequence, so it can be more realistic than convenient. There are sheets on both the port and starboard sides, so it is a team effort between me and Arnaud. This made me very happy. As far as Sophia's ship itself is concerned, it is essentially just a caravel with a square mainsail. It has those sort of double-ender with a quarterdeck lines. The lateen-rigged mizzen is right aft, but that is how some of the historical illustrations show it, with a spar sticking out aft to run the sheet onto. There are also some extra spars out front that serve no discernible purpose. Perhaps they are for craning cargo aboard or something. Most unfamiliar to me was this style of steering mechanism, but it is too elegant not to have existed. You can actually see where it connects to the tiller itself down below, which is a nice touch. So this is all very well researched, right down to how well a caravel would suit a smuggler like Sophia. It is fast and maneuverable for its time and requires relatively little crew, especially compared to contemporary Mediterranean galleys. The main issue here is that the time of the caravel is closer to 1449 than 1349, but that could just mean that we're being consistent. The Count's ship and those we saw at the Red City would be classified as carracks, so between that and the metal crossbow, we could just accept that we are 100 years ahead of where we should be. Some of the armor we encounter might suggest that as well, but I'm no expert there. Which brings us to one final, glaring anachronism. Amicia is still wearing that stupid cooter. Other than mere aesthetic interest or some sort of symbology that I've overlooked, it is entirely counterproductive. It would add weight, restrict mobility, and produce noise and glare. It does, however, exemplify the attention to detail in the character design. The reflections are very good, and you can watch those plates articulate, although sometimes they get misaligned and start clipping together. I digress. Let's get back to the supernatural elements that make all of that irrelevant. The central problem our protagonists face in this story is the macula in Hugo's blood, the thing that connects him to the rats. It represents danger, but also power, which is why everyone wants to take Hugo and use him for their own purposes. The objective that Amicia is so blindly focused on, to the exclusion of all else, is finding some sort of cure. The Order told us that the macula would eventually kill Hugo, and besides that, it would be nice to go to places without them ending up destroyed. And so, after leaving Mother and Lucas behind, we go and find the island from Hugo's dream. That is where Sophia and her ship come in. We exhaust every lead, leaving plenty more corpses behind, mostly those slavers, until there is nowhere left to go but the deepest, darkest place. Hugo's descent steadily grows all the while. Both he and Sophia question Amicia's hopes. For Amicia, though, stopping now would be to let all the effort and all the carnage be for nothing.
Oh, Lord, I hope I'm not wrong.
The need to save Hugo is not just fundamental to her identity now, it is her identity. She is the protector, as the Order would say. She knows no other function. And the sunk cost cannot be justified in any other way. Our father, Arthur, Roderick, Joseph, and all the enemies we've had to kill keep driving us on in a downward spiral of action and consequence, hope and disappointment, cost without benefit. Similarly, we now descend a literal downward spiral of stairs, leading to the deepest nadir of Amicia's arguably misguided hopes. Hugo's objections reach their zenith, and in one sense he turns out to be right. There is no cure. Instead, all we find is the failure of our predecessors. First Amicia and then Hugo come face to face with their failed counterparts of 800 years past. Aelia died trying to break into the Order prison that was built for Basilius. Thinking or knowing her to be dead, Basilius gave in to the macula, his vengeful rage leading to his death and the ensuing Plague of Justinian. Delving too deep spells doom for the island that was such a nice place, at least on the surface. Amicia, however, is optimistic about avoiding Aelia's and Basilius's failures. What she sees is yet another opportunity to save Hugo, as well as countless innocents. If we could just get out of this hellhole and live peacefully somewhere with our friends and family, we might avoid provoking the macula any further. In a sense, this is a lesson for Amicia that she has been missing the forest for the trees. Her single-minded commitment to saving Hugo has continuously led us into situations that actually worsen his condition. There is no magic potion for us to find. All that matters is the love that connects us. On the subject of love and connection, though, our mother and Lucas are here now. We must make one final detour to reunite before we get out of here. Thus begins Chapter 12, the whole of which is a monument to storytelling accomplished in gameplay. There are some quite long cutscenes, but only when needed, only when there is a lot of conversation that just needs to happen in one room. Most dialogue is delivered parallel to the motion of character and camera that keeps the player involved. It would also be wrong to deride this as a walking simulator section. The only thing separating it from the rest of the gameplay is the lack of contextual actions to carry out along the way. That difference is not externally enforced here, instead arising diegetically from the situation.
Dig trenches along the ramparts and fill them with tar. Keep them burning. Any breach could make the palace fall.
And if the rats enter the palace?
Then you're dead. Keep them burning.
Have you fixed the piston yet? We need this cart on the ramparts fast!
Another one.
Get off my back! This thing's so old it might just explode.
We've got wounded up here. It's not pretty. The child may want to look away.
I know blood.
Still, try not to look.
There are more.
My arm! It's burning!
The other ones have been bitten.
Yes, it will soon spread.
It's over. Let him go. Come to your senses. We've got more wounded coming.
It means the child is coming.
The child is supposed to lead us to brighter days, not this carnage.
Quiet! This is not the time to argue.
Children.
It's not much, but we have to mind our supplies.
Let's pray this nightmare ends soon.
This is my fault. Shh, please.
That opening walk is an excellent way of showcasing the consequences of what is about to happen. The vocal track backing the sequence makes it feel like a requiem in advance, a hymn for those who are about to die. And they are about to die because just after we learned the importance of sticking together, these idiots decide it's a good idea to try to rip our family apart. Symbolically, the Count dislocates the arm that traditionally connects Amicia to Hugo, and then we have a scripted confrontation sequence. The incorporation of dialogue makes this feel more like a battle of will and reason, or perhaps unreason.
Emily wants the boy, Amicia. I'm sorry, but she is sure now.
Sure about what?
That your brother is the child of embers. She must have him, so you must die.
No, listen! You are all completely wrong about this! Your cult, everything!
You're probably right. Because I invented most of it. And I did it for her.
What?
Emily. Her bloody parents broke her mind until she tried to take her own life. Poisoned her own body. So I brought her here, offered her this Child of Ember's story, and not only did she believe it, she turned it into hope for the people.
You fed her a lie!
What are you trying to do? Accept your fate!
Yeah!
Oh, damn you!
Hugo, run!
The genius is that the motivations on each side are the same. We could say that the Count is misguided in this effort to save the wife he adores, but Amicia has been guilty of the same in her effort to save Hugo. Emily and Victor are not evil per se, though they are obviously in the wrong here. They are more insane or stupid than they are evil. From a certain perspective, they are, like us, just trying to live. Killing our mother, though, is probably not going to help with that.
We'll get her from inside!
It's you! It's you! I knew it!
Emily, I'll come get you!
No! What are you doing? Please! Please! I'll be a better mother! I'll be a better mother!
You need more rats!
Please!
She is dead for real this time, and for once Amicia encourages Hugo to really let loose, filling up the meter that would have meant a lot more to me if I had ever actually used Hugo's rat mechanics in gameplay. Hugo musters enough power to make Emily pay for what she did, but with two costs. He has passed the buck of revenge on to Victor and given himself over to the macula. After we fall down into the hole where all the rats came from, Hugo's mind seems to have been totally supplanted by the will of this evil power.
It will kill the sun.
What?
Sunkiller. The Light Devourer. It's the nebula the old texts talk about. It's real.
I'm home.
No!
Demonstrating the power of friendship, Lucas is the one who gets us out of this hellhole. It is he who not only fixes the arm the Count dislocated, but also physically puts Hugo's and Amicia's hands back together. After that, Hugo gradually comes back. Lucas remains a damn hero. This story is about a network of relationships, not just one.
Thank you for getting your sister to help me. You saved me.
Look who finally decided to be nice.
Don't make me regret it.
The war's over, Arno. We've all earned a rest. You should try it too.
Hey! Shit!
Damn, the Count.
It's coming fast.
You see, that's the thing with war. You don't get to decide when it's over.
The Count is driven by revenge, but also by a desire to harness Hugo's power. He doesn't know just how uncontrollable it can be. It is he who seals the fate of Marseille by taking Hugo away and, from Hugo's perspective, appearing to kill Amicia. History has now repeated itself. Hugo will fail, give in, and be killed by the macula just as Basilius was. The ensuing carnage will be even more disastrous than what we've caused already. None of this is really Victor's fault. He does not understand the forces he's dealing with, and he wouldn't be doing this if we hadn't killed Emily. But it's not our fault that we killed Emily because she killed our mother. And Emily was just crazy and disillusioned, so maybe it's not her fault either. The questions of fault or justification are useless in situations like this. When we are this far down the spiral of violence, when everyone has their sunk costs to make good, their guilt to allay, and their vengeance to exact, reason and logic are far from forthcoming. No one belligerent can control the situation anymore anyway. All of Requiem feels like just such an out-of-control escalation, experienced as a participant. You feel firsthand the maddening spiral of consequences, many of which are the result of your actions. And again, the narrative guides you through all of this in such a powerful way that, despite the absence of choice, you do feel responsible for those actions. Or at least I did. Arnaud seems wise enough to recognize all of this, which is fitting because he sort of represents consequences. He first came to us because Amicia had killed a bunch of his men, giving her that head wound and, later, helping to heal it. That's because he decided the wind was finally blowing in the right direction for him to exact his revenge on the Count. Eventually, we can piece together that his son was killed in the war with the English. Arnaud blames Victor for this. And finally, we probably wouldn't be in this mess if we had just let Arnaud kill Victor when he first tried. Action, vengeance, and consequences are entwined throughout Arnaud's story, and his story is entwined with ours. Here, though, amidst the debris of Sophia's destroyed caravel, all of that is laid to rest alongside him.
Oh no! This is it! You're too old, Arnaud, too old to fight! And you're so goddamn stupid! Amicia! He's yours!
It's over! Yeah!
With Arnaud and Victor gone, there is no more vengeance left to exact. There are no more scores to settle or justifications to rationalize. It no longer matters how we got here. All that is left is one simple, impossible task. Get to Hugo and stop this. It is finally clear why the menus and chapter screens were changed from the dark theme of the first game to this hazy whiteness. It is the whiteness of a nuclear, or perhaps for this time volcanic, winter, created by the macula so the rats may conquer the surface as well. The nuclear comparison is apt. Traversing mounds of skeletons chewed to the bone evokes the same sickening feeling of loss as climbing through flash-burnt victims in Metro Exodus does. The implication of scale, paired with the specificity of suffering, is quite simply overwhelming. And once we are inside the walls of Marseille, it does look like a blast radius. Concentric waves of rats are radiating out from the epicenter, where we can expect to find Hugo. Perhaps fittingly for these visuals, the choral soundtrack has shifted to unsettling arrhythmic dissonances that would be at home in a science fiction thriller. Indeed, they remind me of the vocalizations that accompany the monoliths in 2001: A Space Odyssey. Lucas tells us what the ancient texts say about all this.
This is the last threshold. All natural laws stop here.
Once we enter the central space, though, it becomes clear to anybody who plays story-heavy video games that this is just one of those contemplative walking through your mind sequences that accomplish retrospection through gameplay. Many games have something like this at the end. In Requiem, of course, the focus is on inescapable consequences and disappointed hopes. Hugo has to teach Amicia, and the player along with her, to do what feels wrong. First by not following the birds, and then by giving up to the rat monsters, we give in to this understanding. The birds represent hope, Amicia's misguided hope of finding a cure.
We tried that way, Amicia, and it was a lie.
Not entirely. There was truth in it.
It was a lie, and it brought death.
The fight with the monsters is an expression of the contest of wills that has left so many dead by her hand.
It hurts to see you fight like that.
Hugo presents the past to us in all its ugliness and wrongness and says that we need to move beyond it.
This place belongs to the past. Leave it. Find your own way.
Giving up is alien to Amicia's character and the entire experience of both these games, but also to any player of video games in general. Willfully laying down and dying is always the furthest thing from your mind. It is usually only resorted to try to fix some kind of bug or progression stopper, if there isn't a restart checkpoint option. And so, when Amicia finally surrenders her heretofore indomitable will, it is as radical a move for the player as it is for her. Hugo, it seems, is the only person in the world who can make her weak. After this willful failure, Amicia is finally reunited with Hugo for a stroll through other failures that belong to the past. people we once saw alive who are now dead. The power of the upcoming ending draws on many things, but one of them is the digging up of old memories. The music in the rat monster fight is the same baleful organ piece that I commented on in the introspective sequence in Innocence, and lines from there are repeated as well.
No! Not them! No!
And earlier we had,
I'll kill all of you if I have to!
when we are done confronting consequences, Amicia bolts the door behind her, like many times before. The animation takes a bit longer, though, which makes sense. While she was doing that, Hugo's corporeal form evaporated. Specific word choice, phraseology, and tactile connections like this link the present to vast tracts of emotional history. I have been listening to the Witcher books recently, and the purposeful repetition of phrases has become fascinating. Recurring motifs like mistaking the stars reflected in the surface of the lake at night for the heavens, or simply the word contempt, are used to make connections of meaning across a sprawling story told from many perspectives. They evoke the memory of moments in past chapters, or even previous books, in an amazingly artful way. In a video game, of course, there are many more ways than words to make such connections felt. Amicia has a carnation in her hair picked up earlier in the chapter.
Carnation? It's the first flower Hugo offered me. Just before we met you, Lucas.
Oh. Makes me feel old.
The bandage around her midsection is from the arrow wound that marked the most recent and most fateful separation from Hugo. The haircut Victor gave us recalls the death of our mother and Hugo's ensuing rage. And we still have that head wound to remind us of Arnaud's story of revenge and consequences. All of this history is carried to the bitter end by Amicia's character model, an outward expression of the guilt, loss, and remorse that internally torment both her and the player. She carries the weight of all 28 hours she has shared with the player across 2 games into this final encounter. The thing that is about to happen is, in my opinion, the best video game ending I have ever experienced, and that is not a statement made without careful consideration. Metro Exodus and Cyberpunk 2077 are probably the closest competitors, but neither of those carried quite this much emotional weight for me. Life is Strange is further back in my memory banks, and while it definitely affected me powerfully, it did not tie up its narrative as neatly as Requiem does. I know there are a lot of people who would suggest Outer Wilds, and that was a good one, but my immersion was broken beforehand by having to look up some of the puzzles that I wasn't smart enough for. There are several choices surrounding this ending that I regard as genius. First, nobody tells you what to do. The closest we get is,
I think you know already. You must stop me. To stop the macula.
Hugo? You can't ask me that.
You're the only one who can stop me from becoming a monster.
You're not a monster.
I will be. If I kill all I love. All these nice things you showed me.
I understand, but...
Please, Amicia.
I'll try.
It is a testament to the quality of this writing that we were already emotionally prepared to be nudged in that direction. There is no stupid prompt saying, left trigger to aim the sling. The writers have put you 95% of the way there, but the last 5% you have to wrestle with on your own. To translate more directly, in my notes at the time I wrote simply, they never told me to do it. There was no prompt, but I knew. This makes the ending your decision, and it is not a cutscene either. The last frame you see before the credits is of the impending action you have chosen, now as irreversible as all the past consequences that are present in your memory. There is another ending, which makes this the only story-related choice given to the player in either Requiem or Innocence. Hugo, as I said, is the only person who can make Amicia weak, and if she hesitates long enough, Lucas takes matters into his own hands. While I do not prefer this ending, the crossbow evokes its own set of memories. Joseph, Arnaud, and much of the fighting that has happened in this game. One of the reasons I prefer Amicia's ending is that the sling draws its memories from across both games. shooting apples out of a tree with father, that fateful first kill where she sacrificed her innocence and committed to the protection of Hugo, that son of a bitch Vitalis and that bastard Count among many other enemies. Every single kill from the first one on makes itself felt in the last. The sling was meant to be an asymmetrical weapon for striking back at those with more power, like David against the Goliath. Now that it has claimed so many lives, though, it would seem that it has only become the weapon of a different sort of Goliath. And now it is time to put an end to all of that. Of course, Hugo himself brings out other memories. He has already said goodbye and cannot be reached. The chasm before us signifies as much. But Amicia remembers him. The player remembers him. All of the time we have shared, every heart-rending moment of motion capture, every chest Hugo helped us to open, every frame of him holding Amicia's hand, every line of dialogue, every well-placed music cue, and every brick that these developers laid in their efforts to build this world and this story. All of that is remembered, and all of that is felt. Deeply, painfully, foundation-shakingly felt in this final, terrible, necessary act. That was the most perfect culmination of emotion and action that I have ever experienced, and it also perfectly terminates the player's creeping doubt about consequences that has persisted for much of the game. This unsettling uncertainty, stoked by the occasional dissent of Hugo and our friends, can now be put to rest. Thinking that we might be the bad guys could have been immersion-breaking in the moment, but this ending locks all of that into the past for good. You were meant to feel that doubt because it was part of the story and it was destined to be resolved. We have now atoned for all those sins in the worst possible way. The only thing left to do is mourn. My final praise for this ending is the courage to irreversibly end the story. These two games will stand together as a monument to the potential of participatory narrative experiences for a long, long time. We need have no concern over the quality of sequels. As I've gone on at length about, the gameplay is not the greatest, and it took 4 hours for this game to really capture me, but none of that can take away from the incomparable power of that ending. And while I did issue a spoiler warning, I am curious how different the experience would be if you knew where it was all heading. Perhaps I shall have to try that myself. I'll probably cry a lot more. There are a lot of moments that would take on an entirely different meaning. With Hugo gone, there is nothing. Amicia knows nothing other than protecting him, so there isn't even any music during the first part of the credits. There's an epilogue where we check in on her and Sophia a year later, mostly just so that we can do a bit of much-needed grieving alongside Amicia. Most significant for the future is the teaser shown after all the credits, showing the arm of a much younger child than Hugo, for now, with the telltale veins of a carrier starting to spread down it. The surprise, though, is the obvious change of setting. We hear some sort of respirator machine running, as well as the approach and retreat of high heels. I would like to imagine that this is the future iteration of Beatrice, the mother who remains associated with the modern version of the Order. I am glad it was decided to let these two games stand as they are, as I said, and I am also intrigued by what a modern setting in the same universe would look like. The explanations given by modern medicine could be quite interesting. It has been 673 years since 1349, so if carriers are supposed to emerge every 800 years or so, we're getting close. Going backwards, it was 808 years to the Plague of Justinian. 864 years before that was the death of Alexander the Great and the dissolution of his empire, which is admittedly a less convincing connection than the perpetually mysterious Bronze Age collapse that was somewhere around 850 years before that. But that is all just speculative extrapolation, and I'm sure they could make it happen whenever they want. It's like earthquakes or volcanoes. The due date is just a guess based on statistics. In the epilogue, Amicia mentions plans to lay out a trail for future protectors to follow, as Aelia tried to do for her. While she and Hugo failed in many ways, they still did a bit better than their predecessors. Amicia is still alive, for one thing, and while she could not save Hugo, she at least reduced the scale of the catastrophe. In this universe, at least. In our history, the Black Death killed more people than the Plague of Justinian, although the numbers are especially up to debate for the latter, and you could contend that it should be calculated as a percentage of those living in Europe. Regardless, Amicia can now help the future Protector a lot more than Aelia did. It will be interesting to see if, with her help, the future iteration of Carrier and Protector can, once again, get things just a little more right than last time.